There are many, many problems associated with the Olympic Games, and I want to just talk about one or two of them in relation to Beijing's Olympic Games. I think the first thing we have to establish is that the Games, the Olympic Games, are not really associated with the nation, they're associated with the city. So, for example, when the British cities competed for the 2012 Games, Manchester and Birmingham competed against London, and London got it, of course. And it's the same with China. I know that Shanghai was a little bit upset because they didn't get the Olympic Games, but then they got Expo 2010, so that was fine. And there's always been a little rivalry between Beijing and Shanghai, so we understand that. Anyway, the Olympics are to do with Beijing. There are problems here because Beijing has always been a city which has been short of water. So it has a very profound environmental problem in that respect. It also has a profound environmental problem in terms of its air quality. It has always been a very polluted city. In April, when the winds come, the pollution gets blown away, but the sand from the desert blows in. So there's always a slightly unpleasant air in Beijing. And it's also a very flat city, so you can't go up onto heights to get away from the fog and the smog. There are real problems here associated with the Olympics. The first is that there will be hundreds of athletes, there will be thousands, perhaps even millions of spectators. There will be all the employees associated with the Games, all the auxiliaries. And there is the building, all the projects which are going on now and which will be completed, more or less are completed now, need a lot of water. They need a lot of energy, a lot of water, simply to build these buildings. And so we already have a huge problem. The local authorities in Beijing have been taking water from the south. There is a plan to bring water from the south to the north. But of course, this also costs energy and money. And in the meantime, farmers around the surroundings of the capital have been forced to give up their farming. Of course, they're compensated by the local authorities, but they give up their farming so that they're not using the water and so that the Olympic Games can draw on those resources instead. With regard to the air, I must say I was absolutely amazed when I went into a hotel in Beijing recently, a few months ago, and saw that there was an oxygen bar. And you could buy a few whiffs of oxygen to relieve your chest from the terrible air outside in the street. It's a very busy city now. When I first went there as a student, it was a city full of bicycles, and it was really only polluted then because people burned coal. But now, of course, everybody has a car or motorbike. There are lots and lots of buses, and of course, there's the very heavy industry. And so the athletes are not happy. Western athletes are really not happy about going and breathing in this very, very poisonous, I'm afraid, air. And some athletes have withdrawn for that reason. So there are these two big problems associated with the Games in Beijing. The other one, of course, is to do with China. Now, I wonder, really, if Europeans and Americans see this in a rather biased way and perhaps don't quite understand that the Games is to do with the city rather than the nation. But as you've probably gathered from the press, Europeans particularly are really very exercised about China and China's human rights record. Now, China is not the worst nation by any means. There are many other nations which have very bad human rights records. And of course, the USA is not entirely innocent either. But it's something that we need to think about. If China is going to be a member of the world community, does China need to improve its human rights record, make its situation more transparent, allow people in, allow free speech and so on, and perhaps not censor the internet in the way that it does? That's one thing which has been rather uppermost in European minds with regard to the Games. The next problem, of course, is the whole problem of Tibet. Now, I think that in a sense, European activists were jumping on the bandwagon. They saw human rights and this lit a light bulb, and so they decided that they would home in on the Tibet issue. And it is a problem issue. Many people believe that Tibet should be an autonomous nation. It had its own royal family, its own aristocracy, its own way of governance. It has this wonderfully unique religion, and it really is unique, whereas other religions have borrowed and become very diffused. Lamaism is very, very unsullied, very pure, and of course it's centred on Tibet. So it really is a very important cultural artefact for the Tibetans. Not to mention their whole history of pastoral activity and many of their very ethnic procedures, their medicine and so on, which is quite different from Chinese medicine. All these things are very Tibetan. And the influx of Han people into Tibet has really destroyed many of these cultural items. And so people are worried about that. But I think, in a sense, that was not an appropriate issue on which to criticise China in relation to the Olympic Games. That's something else. And perhaps people did abuse this issue a bit, but it has brought it to people's minds, and so it's not entirely a bad thing. It needs to be discussed. But the final thing, the thing that really worries me, is the pollution, and it worries me that people are going to Beijing and huge amounts of money are being spent on these games. I just hope that it all goes right in the end. I noticed recently in a newspaper there was a report about a very big bloom of algae in Qingdao Harbour. Now, Qingdao is the city where they're going to hold the sailing events. Has a beautiful big bay, but unfortunately the bay at the moment is covered in algae, lovely green waterweed. Now, no one is going to be able to sail through that. It really will affect the competition. The Qingdao authorities are doing as much as they can to get rid of this at the moment, and we hope that it's all clear in time for the Games. There are many problems associated with this Chinese Beijing Olympic Games, and we hope that everything is cleared up and that the Games go forward successfully, because it will affect the whole world. Thank you.